Hello everyone, welcome to tutorial. Well, in this tutorial we are going to learn about mobx, and mobx is a state management solution just like Redux or Flux. But the only difference between mobx and other libraries out there is like mobx is really simple but it's really powerful as well. Okay, so these are the two main problems that not just mobx but any other libraries tries to solve. And there is one, organizing logic separate from its component, and second one is injecting store to this innermost level component. We're going to see how these 2 points mean. So first we're going to look at organizing logic separate from its component. So here a simple example of a counter application. If I click on this add button, you see it increments. See, in this component there is a state and there is a function which actually increments the count property, and when you increment, the component re-renders and you see the points or this number onto the screen. But the problem over here is like this component has 2 different concerns. There is a state and there is JSX. So what we want to do is we want to remove all this logic from this component, alright, so that the component concern is to just render onto the screen. It really helps to clean our component, and it's really easy to debug and share state between components. And the second topic, injecting store into innermost level component, is like this is a second example. And if you see, there is an app.js which has the logic, and instead of rendering onto the screen, it is rendering second component and passing this function and this state to the second component. And this second component is taking all its props and passing it to third component. This happens a lot if you this is a lame example, but if you really done lot of React, you will see this is a very common scenario, that there is a component just like second component which actually does nothing. It just passes the props to its innermost level component. That's what it's doing right now, right? The second component is not doing anything else, it's just taking its props and passing it to third component. So we really don't need second component. What we need a mechanism to pass third component, or at the state the third component needs. So that's what any mobx or any other state management libraries can do, is to inject directly to the component that needs it. Alright, so the third component will get all its state directly injected to it. So we don't need an intermediate component just like second component. So we're gonna see how these things work, and the concept that I talked about will get more clear. So let us talk. These are the 4 main core concepts of mobx. There is observer, there is observable, there is action, and there is computer property. So these words may look a little bit more tough, a little bit more complicated, but the concept behind it is very simple. So first we're going to look at observer and observable. You see it, index.js. This is a simple project I created using create react app, and instead of rendering app component, I'm going to render counter component. Counter component is not created yet. We're going to create over here. It is going to be a stateless function component, which renders count value. I haven't created this state yet, so let us create a mobx state over here. And before creating any mobx state, let's just create a simple JavaScript object. So let's just get an app state, okay, and it's going to be a simple object which is going to have a count property. Now to convert this simple object state into an observable state, we simply need to import observable from mobx. So what we need to do is we need to install these 2 libraries, mobx and mobx react. Alright, so this are the 2 different libraries that we need to use mobx with react. So we need to input observable from mobx, because whatever things we need to create a state specific to mobx, we're going to import from mobx, and whatever bindings and we need to bind mobx and react together, we're going to import from mobx react. So to convert this normal object into an observable object, we're going to simply wrap this object with observable function. Now whatever this observable function returns is going to be an mobx state, or rather this app state is not an object, it's an observable object. Now to make this component re-renders, what we're going to do is we're going to pass that app state, alright, as a prop to this counter component. And this counter component, since it is a stateless functional component, is going to accept app state as a params. Okay, This is how we access props in stateless function component. Now to access this count, we simply gonna access it as a normal object, so it's going to be app state dot count. Now if you look at the screen, this won't re-render, and the reason behind it, because we have created an observable state, but this component is not going to re-render, because to make this component re-render, we would need to import observer from mobx react, and we would need to wrap this observer onto this component, and now this component will re-render. Because what mobx does is that mobx will observe this component, alright, and it will going to look, okay, which mobx state is changed, and based upon that it will make decision which component needs to re-render. So decision which state is changed and which component needs to re-render, then mobx does for us. So we don't have to make decision, okay, this component, this state is changed, so this component needs to re-render and that component don't need to re-render. That decision mobx does for us. What we need to do is we need to simply mark every single component that we do as an observer. That's it. That's a single thing we need to do. Okay, I'm going to start my server by typing yarn start. Okay, so you see so you will see that there is a count 0 over here. Now to modify this count, now we are successfully able to create any observable state, and we was able to inject it into our observer, any React component. Now to modify this state, what we're going to do is we're going to simple create a add button over here. Okay, and we're gonna do it without action. We're gonna see, you know, how do we need to modify properly by using action, because that is much preferred way to modify state. But we can simply modify count by calling in a simple function like this, and if I save it and reload, now if I click on add, you see it increments. Great. So we are able to inject mobx and React together, but you see we cannot modify state by simply, you know, modifying the state like this, because this is very hard to detect which function is actually modifying the state. Actually removes the purpose of keeping logic from this component, because we are actually modifying the state over here, so we are keeping the logic inside this component. So we need to move this logic outside of this component. So for that we use actions. Alright, that is the second is really important, because it allows us to organize our state, and you know, we are able to detect, okay, this is a state and this function is actually modifying it. So what happens, our component job is to just to re-render. Alright, so to create action, we need to import action from mobx, and I'm gonna create increment count, and we're gonna create increment count function, and this is going to modify app state dot count plus equal to 1. Now to modify this normal function as an action, I would need to wrap it with action function over here. So now this increment count is not a simple function, it is an action now. Alright, so it really helps, it really keeps our component clean. So here we don't need to put this logic, we simply need to remove it from here. I'm going to call app state dot increment count. Okay, so this component, you see this counter component doesn't have any kind of logic, it just rendered JSX onto the screen. All the logic is removed from the counter app is onto this mobx state. Now if I save it and it reloads, and if I click on it, you see it increments. So this is how action does. It helps us to keep our components clean, and it helps us to separate the concern between a mobx state and the component. So last and final concept that we want to talk about over here is computer property. We use computer property to, it has the same concept of deriving data from our state. Alright, so let us see a quick example over here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a first name property as a okay, and last name property over here. And to what we can do, if we want to access full name, or if we don't want to access only first name or last name, we want to access full name, so what we can do, we can create a function like get full name, and what it does, like it returns appstate dot first name plus appstate dot last name. So we can use this get full name function, like instead of count I'm gonna call this get full name function over here, and I'm gonna remove this one. Let's add to do, we don't need it. And if I save it, so you can see Shoaib Bhimani over here. But the problem over here, like whenever this component re-renders, this function is called every single time this component re-renders. But what computer property does, like if any of this state is not changed, it is never going to be called again and again. Alright, so it keeps cached value and is only going to run whenever any of its dependency is changed. This get full name function has two dependencies. It has first name dependency and the last name is dependency. So any of these two variable changes, so this function will get called. Alright, if it is not changed, the cached value is going to be returned. So this function will not be called every single time this function is re-rendered. So how do we create a computer property? To create a computer property, you simply need to add get in front of this function. I'm gonna remove this colon over here. I'm going to remove this arrow from here as well. So now this full name is actually a computer property. To access computer property, we don't call it as a function, we simply access as a property. Alright, so what this get full name is a computer property, so it's only going to be call this, alright, whenever any of its dependency changes. If any of its dependency is not changed, this function will never going to be called. So this really gives a lot of performance to this application. If I save it and re-render, you see it works. Now I'm gonna create a simple button, okay, and give it a value as change name, and based on click I'm going to call app state dot change first name. Now I'm going to call change first name action. Alright, so this first name is going to modify the state, so it's going to be an action, and I'm going to simply change this app state dot first name equal to Z. If I save and reloads, and now if I click on change name, you see it changes the first name from Shoaib to Z, and this component gets re-rendered. This is a four fundamental concept of mobx, is to create a state like a simple JavaScript object and wrap it as observable, and every single component that we create, we need to make it an observer, and we don't pass this mobx state as a prop over here. We do it in a more proper way, which we're gonna learn in next tutorial. So now to modify any state, we use actions, and we use computer property to get value from our state. Alright, so this is the four main fundamental concept of mobx. So we need a little bit of more boilerplate to do it in a more proper way, and we're gonna see in the next tutorial. Bye.